Latest tarot on. I never know when to start these because the circle goes around a little while before it actually says that it started. So I do believe it started now. So hello and welcome to our Tarot On, our online event live in Facebook during the great pandemic of 2020, the great lockdown, of which we're now into our third week here in the UK, and there are promising signs of plateauing of new cases, of cases in hospitals, and so on. So, although different countries are at different stages in this situation, I hope everyone here in the live group is taking care of themselves, looking after themselves, looking after each other as well. Again, I found it very interesting that the word pandemic comes from pandemos, meaning all the people. It's where we get the word democracy, demos, from. So let's all be masters and mistresses of the hermits, the Order of the Hermits, of which we are now all part, and look after ourselves and each other as best we can. So what I'm going to do this evening is continue our second part from yesterday of looking at the Waite-Smith tarot. That's what we're going to look at today a little bit more. And I'm going to be continuing the same themes that we picked up yesterday of taking literally Occam's razor to the cards, like the simplest possible explanation that fits the most circumstances. And whilst there have been all sorts of guesswork, I guess, into what there's anything useful left by Pamela or Arthur Edward Waite, then what we wanted to do was go back right to the original sources and see what Pamela was doing at the time, see what Waite was doing at the time, see what materials they'd have at the time, and then develop it from there. And also we knew that Pamela was very, very inconsistent. It was the bane of her life, really, and she did play up to that storyteller, Jamaican storyteller archetype. In fact, it is quite interesting. Perhaps now we might even see Pamela not in a sort of romantic light, in the sense of she was, a minority and an oddball, an outlier, and so on. But actually, one could equally say that she was what's now known as cultural appropriation of her knowledge of Jamaica in order to deliver folk stories and so on, and dress up in a sort of gypsy fashion, which wasn't necessarily part of her actual heritage. She was American, as far as we can tell, as far as the records would have it. Be that as it may, I'm not here to do an interpretation of Pamela Coleman-Smith's actual life, but of the cards that she designed. Now, Pamela, we believe, designed most of the minor arcana. Waite had a heavy hand in the major arcana. So it's to Pamela's life we need to go a lot more to look at the minor arcana. And we know that she was very immersed in the theatre. She did theatrical design, but she was a nightmare to work with. Jack Yates actually complained that she always had too many irons in the fire, and the magazine that she did with him, called The Green Sheaf, or Green Sheaves, I think, folded quite quickly because she left it to the last minute to hand draw things, to hand colour things. and apparently she was very difficult to work with. In fact, as Marcy's saying, we do have newspaper reports of her stage performance. Basically, you'd have a female singer go on, then you'd have a comedian, then you'd have Pamela Coleman-Smith just before the interval, not makeup, but speak out some Jamaican stories probably with an accent. And then repeat that after the interval as well. So that's how she made her money. She certainly didn't make it from the tarot, but neither did Arthur Edward Waite, to be honest. It wasn't until the late 60s when Stuart Kaplan decided to republish them that any money was actually made, and that was long after Waite-Smith had passed away. So what I'm going to do first is just read a little bit of Shakespeare for us, and this evening we also have a bedtime story from Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, continuing our series of that as well. So when I was at high school, I did English literature at A level, and it was a very enjoyable subject, but I was very shy at the time. And so it was a bit of a nightmare to have to read anything out in class. And our teacher, who was a very gifted English teacher, ended up having me play having me play Sherlock Holmes in a play that we then, as a sixth form, took around the northeast of England. And I had to perform and tap dance and sing a little bit as well. And I think he really did do that to get me out of my shell a little bit. But I went back in it for a couple of years after that. So forgive me murdering Shakespeare in a second, but I'd like to read this section from Henry V, Act 4, the prologue. And the whole scene is talking about a battlefield and a battle that's about to commence. And it starts off describing the camp scene. Now entertain conjecture for time when creeping murmur and the pouring dark fills the wide vessel of the universe. From camp to camp through the foul womb of night, the hum of either army stilly sounds. That the fixed sentinels almost receive the secret whispers of each other's watch. Fire answers fire, and through their pearly flames each battle sees the other's umbered face. Steed threatens steed, in high and boastful neighs piercing the night's dull ear. And from the tents the armourers, accomplishing the night, with busy hammers closing rivets up, give dreadful note of preparation. The county cocks do crow, the clocks do toll, and the third hour of drowsy morning named, proud of their numbers and secure in soul, the confident and overlusty French do the low-rated English play at dice, and chide the crippled, tardy-gated knight, who, like a foul and ugly witch, doth limp so tediously away. The poor condemned English, like sacrificers, by their watchful fires, sit patiently and idly ruminate the morning's danger, and their gesture sad. Investing lankling cheeks and war-worn coats, presenteth them unto the gazing moon so many horrid ghosts. O now who will behold the royal captain of this ruined band? So that's the sort of pre-battle sequence described by Shakespeare in Henry V. And we obviously know that Pamela was very immersed in the theatre, but I'm particularly interested in some of the lines here where it talks about the armourers accomplishing the nights, i.e. arming everyone, the dawn sneaking around like a tardy-gated, crippled figure, and who doth limp so tediously away. The poor condemned English, by their watchful fires, sit patiently. The whole thing is a wonderful description of something, and we have seen it in several of Pamela Coleman-Smith's art, particularly when it draws on the Solar Busker cards. So here we see a figure in the Solar Busker carrying swords. That was the 7 of swords from the Solar Busker. But of course, we know that Pamela was never consistent. So here we have the 7 of swords, though, where Pamela has drawn the tardy gate, that sort of sneaking around of the dawn. She's drawn the camp. She's drawn the armourer, hence the heavily sort of woolen hat and this sort of almost chainmail cover that he's got. And he's actually carrying the swords to the knights. And in the background, of course, we have the watch playing dice as described in the very scene itself. That's what they're doing in the background. That's the English unknowing that the French are going to come and beat them, just playing dice. And that is basically the camp scene described in Henry V, the prologue. And it really gives a wonderful picture of what was in Pamela's mind when she drew this card, which is about quarrelling, a plan that may fail, design, wish, hope, confidence, all of the things that Waite put to the card, Pamela Coleman Smith very ably illustrated. But of course, she was basing it on Book T, so she used a Shakespearean image to illustrate a Kabbalistic interpretation of the card. So if you go and look at the 7 of Swords in Book T, which I'll put an upload or a link to Book T because it is available online in several places. You'll see how this card fits very perfectly. Makes sense? So we explain it through Shakespeare, and then we explain this card through Shakespeare, and 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 so on and so on. Basically, you can explain at least 60% of every specific symbol very easily by just referring it to what Pamela Coleman Smith knew, which was Shakespeare. Now, also, let me just read this from another play, not a Shakespearean one. This one was written by Tennyson. And now I'm not going to be able to find it. Let me just take a look here. Oh, it's I'm going backwards. So there is a story where someone is killed by a load of knights, and they're stabbed in the head, very specifically stabbed in the head. And the scene plays out like this. The last to rid thee of a world of brawls, brackets, stage direction, kills him. This figure here, this is the knights talking as they kill him. The traitor's dead and will arise no more. Well, we can certainly see that. Nay, have we stilled him? What, the great archbishop? Does he breathe? No, Reginald, he is dead. Storm bursts. Will the earth gape up and swallow us? The deed's done, away. And off the knights go, having killed Becket. And Becket was the sort of Archbishop of Canterbury, and this is why the figure has the hierophantic symbol here with his sort of pose. He's wearing the white undershirt, the red overtop, and the hair shirt. This is very deliberately a hair shirt that Becket was said to wear under his outer garments. And you can see the storm. Can you see how Pamela has drawn the storm forming from this line in the distance and then slowly creeping up and then just making black here? It's the storm that actually was said to have taken place when Becket was murdered. And if I'll put up some illustrations into the group a little bit later, and you can see how some of the images of the knight stabbing Beckett really have him stabbed in the head, because it wasn't necessarily for Pamela really to put a sword right in his head or right in the back of his neck. She could have just done them across his body, but she deliberately did it like this because that play was written by Tennyson, and Henry Irving, who was very influential to Pamela through the Lyceum Theatre, played this character, played Beckett, and we have an image of Henry Irving as Beckett in the book here, you can see. And can you see the knights as well, and the tents that make it onto the other swords cards as well? There in the background. So again, Pamela was basically using things that she was familiar with, because she couldn't use, I don't know, she couldn't use Picasso's background and knowledge because she wasn't Picasso. She just used her own knowledge and background to draw and design the cards as best she could. And yeah, it's definitely overkill, that's for sure. But I like to see this card from the Ten of Swords as, in a reading, in a practical sense, and this is where we'll come to tomorrow when we use these cards in a practical reading. What's the point of knowing all of this if we don't use it? And I see this card as a death of authority. Take care, Shaheen. A death of authority and a overthrowing of old ideas because they've all been fixed or overthrown or not come to anything. So there's a good thing with this card in the sense of what doesn't work anymore. In terms of the scientific method, you've disproven or you've proven things that don't work. So what you're left with, like Sherlock Holmes would say, must be true, no matter how improbable it actually is. So there is a good side to this card, even though it's quite painful to come to a particular conclusion by having got rid of all of the things that you thought. Each of these swords is a thought or an idea that has come to nothing and has now led you to waste your time. But the Hierophant, i.e. your own sense of authority, is now pinned to the ground and can't go anywhere. The tens can only go to one new ace, back to the Ace of Swords with one clear new idea and start that cycle again. Kabbalistically and in the tarot, you'll find that the swords really don't like to be at the end. They really don't like to be in the nines or tens because swords are air, they are thoughts, correspond to thoughts, symbolize thoughts, and so they don't like to be fixed. They have a real problem towards the end. Pentacles, for example, love to be sort of beginning, end, middle, and they don't mind. Cups like to be quite at the beginning and at the end, but not really in the middle, and so on. So you can actually see these four worlds have their favorite place in that sequence. And it is awakening. The only thing you can do from this, having known who the traitors actually are, who the backstabbers are, is go round it again, knowing that there's a new start. It gets black and then it just turns white on the other side of this. It's far better reverse this card because all of those swords will just fall out. It's a very powerful card upside down, this in a reverse position in a reading. It means you can really suck all of those swords out and get on with something new. Yeah, Control Alt Delete basically. That's how one could see it. Okay, so again, that isn't Shakespeare, but it is a play that Tennyson wrote that Pamela was very familiar with and explains this. Similarly, the quality of mercy is not strained, it falleth like rain upon those blah, blah, blah. This is from The Merchant of Venice, this very scene. Similarly, these two cards here, and I'll put up a picture, are both the same character and two different quotes. One, they're both in The Merchant of Venice, and this character wearing that exact hat says that he has or had the world in the palm of his hands, And this character says, oh, my boats are going to come back earlier than I thought. Well, they're the same character, just two different parts of the play. And if you think we're stretching the point at any time, as we did in our research in the book, then it's very simple. We just go to the original sources and take a look in Pamela's own drawings. Can you see this from her illustration for the Merchant of Venice? See the hat the character is wearing? Can you see the poles down here, which are actually the Venetian poles to fasten the boats up to, and the boats in the background? So we know that that's the Merchant of Venice that Pamela has put into these cards, because we have her pictures of the Merchant of Venice in exactly the same robes and hat, and the boat sailing off, and the poles as well, which she's repurposed as these sort of strange poles on the top of the castle there, which obviously serve no real function other than to maybe be flagpoles or something. But that very quote appears in The Merchant of Venice. So we're pretty confident that these three cards really do match scenes from The Merchant of Venice. And that's as it should be, because that's what Pamela was drawing. Similarly, and for those that already know this, please excuse the repetition of it, but the boot and the untied shoe, which is very deliberately untied, you can see that, if I can have a pen and not damage my cards, can you see how this is unlaced? It's not just a shoe and a boot, that shoe is actually unlaced. You can see that Pamela's very carefully drawn the lace dangling off the shoe. And that is because this character is Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew. And it's the scene where he pretends to fend off all of the people who don't want him to wed Kate by saying, I will buckle thee against 1,000. And that's what he's doing in this very scene. And he is turned up at the wedding very badly dressed, and is literally described as having a candle case for a boot and an unfastened, an untied shoe. And again, the simplest explanation is that Pamela understood Shakespeare. She designed sets for Shakespeare and other plays, and that's what she used. And it explains over 60% of the images with no other explanation necessary. There's no other explanation necessary. And that fits our Occam's razor approach to the tarot. Okay? Now, it wasn't just Shakespeare that Pamela was. Oh, and here's a picture of our guy Oscar Ashe again as Petruchio. Now, we have a better picture that we weren't allowed to use in the book because we couldn't afford the licensing. We paid an absolute fortune for licensing some of the pictures in here. But we just literally ran out of money, and there was no way the book would ever make enough money back for us to license every single photo. But I have one for internet use, at least, that really shows Petruchio, Oscar Ashe, more in this pose, dressed with the boot and the shoe, far better than this one. So hence it's why it's good doing a video, because we can actually talk about some of the things that didn't get into the book that make our point even better than the things that did get in the book. But again, it wasn't just Shakespeare that Pamela was alluding to. Other plays that she was familiar with, she repurposed. And again, I don't know if I have the exact picture in the book or whether we put it somewhere else. No, we didn't. This here when people have talked about it's very strange that the guy looks quite young, but is quite tall, and the woman looks like a grown woman, but she's quite small. And it's very odd. And then there's this character, this guardsman, sort of disappearing off into the background. And she's wearing this sort of white glove, like a sort of gardening glove. Um, and she's got the arm wrapped in a shawl. And again, we only need one explanation for this particular card. And there's a lesser known play that called Nance Oldfield that Ellen Terry famously was in. And it was based on a real actress, but guess what the actress Nance Oldfield's other job was? She was a florist. She was a florist. And this isn't another myth. She was so vain, apparently, that she was buried in her white kidskin gloves. And there we have her white kidskin gloves. Ellen Terry complained, we have a record of her complaining when she played the role, that the wig, the golden wig and the headdress wouldn't quite fit on, so she couldn't really move her head around in case it fell off. And the original picture of Nance Oldfield has her with the glove and with her arm in the shawl, exactly as we see in the picture. The other interesting thing about Nance Oldfield, and again, that's the Occam's razor approach, is that in her real life, the actress Nance Oldfield, her father was, guess what? He was the captain of the guard. So it explains the whole picture. Now, the play explains the theme of the picture, which is that in the play, a young poet falls in love with the beautiful women that are being played by an elder actress, Nance Oldfield. And he acts a lot older, he dresses up and acts a lot older than he actually is, whereas Nance Oldfield, of course, is an older woman who is then wondering whether to play this lad for a fool because she can see right through him, but he doesn't know that. And the whole thing, she's called Nance Oldfield, he's called Oldfellow. So the surnames are a play on this idea of age differences and how you present your age to other people. And Pamela's massively captured that for the Six of Cups, the Tifereth of Bria, in this idea that when we get to that point, we need to act our age. And this card then, for me, personally, nowadays when I read it, it really does tell me that someone is pretending to be innocent when they're not, like, oh, I didn't know that, or they're acting older than they actually are. And sometimes there can be some inner child work that is highlighted for the client when this card comes up. Now, again, interestingly enough, in the background, when this play was first put on, Ellen Terry played Nance Oldfield, and her son, Gregory, I can't remember his name. If Toll is in the group, she might remember. But her son, who was a very famous set designer as well, he played the young poet making amorous moves on the actress who was being played by his mother. So again, very strange. This is why this card sort of gives me the creeps as well. It's a very strange card, very strange design, very strange play, but perfect to allude to that sense of strangeness in someone's life situation as well. Incidentally, in the play as well, he has a very particular hat, which Pamela has drawn as well, so that we really do know that this is that particular play. And again, I've summarized that in a little meme type graphic that I'll put up in the Facebook group. If you're watching this as a recording, you may have to look through the Facebook group or just ask us again to put up the pictures that are associated with this set of recordings. If you remind us in the group, they're called the Tarot in Real Life Tarot in Real Life for Instagram images. I designed them originally for Instagram from the book. Of course, you could just buy the book. And then you'd have all of this information and all of the stuff that goes around it as well. Okay, we've got time for just one final one, which is one of my favourites. I never ever understood this card. But then we found the picture that Pamela was basing it on. And I say was basing it on because I'm 100% convinced, using Occam's razor, because if you can find me another picture that has a mercurial dancing figure juggling two things in front of a wavy ocean with a boat on it, then be my guest, knock yourself out, let me know, and I'll revise everything that I think we now know about this picture. But we found one, and the one picture was in Edward Burne-Jones's The Flower Book, and there are several pictures in there when you go and look through it that are remarkably similar to tarot cards, because Pamela probably had it in her mind because it was donated to the British Museum. Guess which year? The very year that Pamela drew these pictures. And so she was most likely familiar with it. Edward Burne-Jones was a major influence on her. She could not have seen this picture book. And this picture in Edward Burne-Jones, and again I'll put up a picture in the Facebook group, is False Mercury. I don't know if we have it in the book. We might have managed to get that one in the book. Let's have a look. Perhaps we did, perhaps we didn't. We didn't. We just mention it. Yeah, that's right, because the source for the picture book, I think, is the British Library, and they probably wanted an awful lot more money than we had to reproduce one image, particularly in a book that was selling across the States and so on. So this is in the Flower Book called False Mercury. And his flower book illustrated different herbs and different flowers by their Latin names. And this was his illustration for False Mercury. And he drew a mercurial dancing figure with two globes dancing. And this is why we have the snake belt and the almost magician-like feel to the character. It's Mercury. And the snake going round here. And in the figure, he's actually dancing on the boat with these two poor sailors in it. And the two poor sailors are being shown in these two globes images of home, like the home and the garden. And basically, Mercury is telling them everything's fine, everything's safe, you have no need to worry, you're going to make it home, whilst they're just dying of hypothermia and exposure and so forth. And that's why the image is called False Mercury. Now, why would Pamela pick this card, pick that image to depict the Two of Pentacles? Because surely everyone knows this is about work-life balance, juggling your finances and so on. No, wrong. It's not about that at all. Every person, ever since Pamela drew this picture, has looked at the picture, picked up the idea of juggling, the idea of dancing, and then over time has generated this card to mean juggling with finances, and so on and so on. When in fact the original meaning was False Mercury, and if you read Waite about this card, he talks about miscommunication. He actually describes the card as, someone in effect showing you something that isn't true and so on. And the Two of Pentacles carries that sort of idea. It's a dualism of the book that I'm talking about is Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot. Buy it now. Operators are standing by to take your call. Every book comes with 3 pages inside with words on them as well. Okay, bonus, don't miss it. So basically, this is false Mercury. And now when I see this card, I no longer think of it as juggling finances. Yeah, as a charlatan, false Mercury, as someone who has presenting one thing when in fact another thing is the case, as divided people's perspective, to send them different directions. There is something very amiss when this card comes up. There is something not being spoken. There's something deliberately being hidden, like the magician when he says, look at this bunch of flowers, when he's doing the next trick in his right hand and he's holding the flowers and diverting your attention. This is saying, oh, everything is fine. Duplicity, brilliant. What a great word for it. Yeah, trickster as well. But it has got that dualistic thing in the place that you don't need it, which is a seer, the world of action, the world of pentacles. You want that one thing or everything. You don't want it split down the middle. And that's what false Mercury is doing. Okay, so I hope now we have seen over these last 2 sessions that all of these cards from the minors, are all easily based on Shakespeare, and you don't need any explanation other than that. And that's where we came to it from in Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot, to really explore them from Waite's perspective, which we'll come on to a bit more tomorrow when we look at the major arcana and we look at abiding in the sanctuary. The flower book, I'll put a link to. I think you can see images of the flower book on the British Library or the British Museum site, but also some did a nice animation of them on YouTube, I think, just flicking through the pages. And you'll see at least a couple, particularly the flower called Will He Return or Will He Come Back or something, that Pamela sort of half-inched this design from as well. Okay. But you'll see that in the flower book, and one that's very similar to the moon, the tower on the moon, and so on. She was very influenced by the things around her, and that's she only had 5 months to do a deck, so of course she used what she had in her head. She couldn't really design a totally new artistic set of thematic drawings for a brand new tarot deck. You try doing that in 5 months. See if you can develop a tarot deck based on an entirely alien to you set of concepts. Like if someone asked me to design a Maori tarot deck, and I had 5 months from now to work out everything about Maori culture, everything about the artwork, everything about the style, everything about the stories, the myths, and everything, in order to produce within those 5 months at the same time an entire set of 78 pictures that hung together consistently. It's impossible. You have to, in that amount of time, use what you know, and that's exactly what Pamela did. So tomorrow we'll return to the major arcana and we'll look at those as more to do with Waite and the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, and how Waite in particular saw the Shekinah. The Shekinah, if you ask me one word that was most important to the Waite-Smith Tarot, from Waite's point of view, the one word would be Shekinah. And Shekinah is the Hebrew word for the presence of God as it manifests in the world. and it's often seen as a feminine. So Waite saw it like that, as a feminine nature. When the divine is manifest in our real world, it comes in a sort of feminine package almost. And that's how Waite saw it, and he hints at it in Pictorial Key. But 10 years later, when he had the chance to redesign a tarot set of images, which he then did, then we see this full-on mystical approach to the Shekinah, to the ascent narrative of the spiritual life built into those images. That's what we see in the Waite-Trinic deck, which he did 10 years later. And again, that was hidden for 100 years. Very few people knew about that deck until it was rediscovered by Italo in the British Museum. The original artwork for it, which we reproduced as Abiding in the Sanctuary. So with those two things, then you have the more complete set of what Waite and Smith were going for, not what everyone since then, the hundreds of books since then have been written about it. Tali actually went through every book in the library, and our collection anyway, of meanings for this one card, and did like a family, genealogy for all of the meanings. And you can see how they start off quite simple, and then as time goes on, people copy other people's meanings, and then certain DNA strands come through, like the juggling. The juggling is the major thing that people picked up because they had no other information on the card. So no one mentions miscommunication. No one mentions Mercury, false Mercury, what was that wonderful word? Duplicity, that we had it here in the group today. Everyone goes on about, and eventually, when you get to more the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you start to see things like work-life balance being mentioned. Because up until the 70s, or well, actually not until the 80s, I think, in that family tree of meanings, do you get things like work-life balance, because no one had work-life balance up until then. It wasn't even a concept. It's quite fun sometimes when you look at the financial indications of the cards through the magazines from the 1930s and the 1950s, and then into the 60s and 80s. You see things like debt and things like that. And while the infinity symbol is part of the link to the magician, to the Mercury card as well. So I'll put the graphics that show all of that in detail into the Facebook group before I go to sleep immediately after this. So let's talk about remembering things and forgetting things, because in effect everyone forgot where these came from, and we had to remember where they came from because they've been overlaid by hundreds and hundreds of other meanings being copied one from another, from just being made up by looking at the pictures, which is fine. It is a way of reading them, but not the total picture. So we're now going to read stories from cities and memory. Just to answer Esther, it does have an intrinsic meaning, and the intrinsic meaning for this card for me is, I guess, duplicity. I'm going to steal that. Who do I need to steal that from? Just so I make sure I never ever refer to Diane DeMarco ever again, because duplicity is such a great word for this. But yeah, I'll try and credit you every time I steal it. Okay, but it does have miscommunication. I think false Mercury is the meaning for this. Have we got a moment? Let them just. It's a good point to. I have this idea about tarot, so if you just wait a second for the bedtime story, it's a good opportunity to explain this while it's in my head. We talk about interpretation, we talk about meaning of cards, and we see it all of the time when people come on Facebook and they say, what does this card mean? And for 40 years, that question, not the answer, but the question has always intrigued me. What do we mean when we say, what does a card mean? Now, my answer to that over the last 40 years has been there's an idea in fractals, and actually the idea has just eluded me. So, like a vanishing point, and the idea's come back. Thank heavens for that. A strange attractor. In fluid dynamic theory, you have this idea that's into fractals of what's called a strange attractor, and it's a point that something goes to in a graph that it never reaches. So you draw the graph of an equation, and basically if you have a line going up it like that, you know that it's going to reach a point. But in fluid dynamics, it's a weirder world of maths, and you have these strange attractor points that make fractals. So as you try and draw the line, or the computer draws the line towards this strange attractor, it never gets there. And the deeper down you go, you just get more patterns, and it does sort of aim somewhere, like in circles, in spirals, in fern leaves, in galaxies, in snowflakes. They fractal out, but they never quite, they're going somewhere, but they never get there. Now, I reckon that the universe, in a sense, is built of about 78 strange attractors. And those strange attractors allow the entire universe to arise in the patterns that we perceive it as. Now, the reason it's 78 is just because of the way our brains work. For dolphins, the universe doesn't work like this, but dolphins don't read tarot, to my knowledge. So these strange attractors are the 78 cards, are illustrated by these cards. And so this card generally means duplicity. I don't know who gave me that idea, or deception, or duality, or work-life finances, and so on. And that's roughly the strange attractor that's somehow behind this card that it sort of revolves around but never gets to. So it can have thousands of potential meanings that are all around this invisible point that's somewhere down the infinite line to duplicity, division, and so on. Similarly, this card, say, for example, about, say, if we said optimism or new ventures, that has another strange attractor that it sort of revolves around. And that has thousands of potential meanings as well. Now, eventually, any of these cards can go onto one of the other attractors. You could read this as optimism, probably in a particular reading. It would have a very particular meaning in that oracular moment for a particular question, in a particular situation. You could say that this card is optimism. It's highly unlikely because this card fastens closer to that strange attractor. But if you imagine that all 78 cards are sort of part of this system of 78 strange attractors, then generally the 3 of Swords is going to be sorrow more than the 10 of Cups. But on one occasion, probably in 1,000, 10,000 readings, the 10 of Cups could indicate sorrow, in the same way that the 3 of Swords could indicate a happy celebration and occasion. Highly unlikely, but possible. And that's how the cards work. They all attract themselves to these 78 strange attractors. So when someone says, what does a card mean? I will tend to say it tends towards sorrow. It tends towards miscommunication. It tends towards whatever. And that allows me to actually explain what a card means without saying what it always means. Make sense? Sort of ish. Anyhow, that was a strange diversion down a strange attractor, but it was a really interesting question. So let's go and see our city, which is Zora. Beyond 6 rivers and 3 mountain ranges rises Zora, a city no one having seen it can forget. But not because, like other memorable cities, it leaves an unusual image in your recollection. Zora has the quality of remaining in your memory point by point, in its succession of streets, of houses along the streets, and of doors and windows in the houses, though nothing in them possesses a special beauty or a rarity. Zora's secret lies in the way your gaze runs over patterns following one another, as if in a musical score, where not a note can be altered or displaced. The man who knows by heart how Zora is made, if he is unable to sleep at night, can imagine he is walking along the streets. And he remembers the order by which the copper clock follows the barber's striped awning, then the fountain with the 9 jets, the astronomer's glass tower, the melon vendor's kiosk, the statue of the hermit and the lion, the Turkish bath, the cafe at the corner, the alley that leads to the harbour. The city which cannot be expunged from the mind is like an armature, a honeycomb in whose cells each of us can place the things he wants to remember. Names of famous men, virtues, numbers, vegetable and mineral classifications, dates of battles, constellations, parts of speech. Between each idea and each point of the itinerary, an affinity or a contrast can be established, serving as an immediate aid to memory. So the world's most learned men are those who have memorized Zora. But in vain I set out to visit the city, forced to remain motionless and always the same, in order to be more easily remembered. Zora has languished, disintegrated, disappeared. The earth has forgotten her. That's the city of Zora in Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, and perhaps that had a little bit to do with the esoteric concept of correspondence. So I'd like to thank you. We've overrun a little bit. Our usual time is about 40 minutes. We've gone to about 50. So thank you for your time and attention. Again, tomorrow we're going to come back to Waite and look at the Waite-Smith tarot in a bit more detail. And then we're going to round back on our NLP and symbolism and bringing all of the cards together with different decks other than the Waite-Smith, the Thoth and others. So thanks a lot for your time and attention. I hope you had a good evening or good late afternoon, depending on where you are. And we'll meet same time, same place tomorrow. Thanks a lot for your time and attention. Bye for now.